It started as a celebration, one of those picture-perfect vacations where every moment seems frozen in laughter, sunshine, and music echoing over the ocean. The year was 1999, and identical twin sisters, Emily and Elise Cartwright, had just turned 21. To mark the milestone, their parents surprised them with a week-long Caribbean cruise. It was supposed to be unforgettable, and it was, just not in the way anyone expected. On the fourth night of the cruise, Elise vanished. No one saw her fall overboard. There were no signs of struggle, no clear witnesses, no clues, just an empty cabin, a single shoe near the railing, and unanswered questions that multiplied with every passing hour. What followed was a nightmare played out beneath white cruise ship lights and the suffocating silence of the open sea. Emily, her twin, insisted her sister wouldn't have just left, wouldn't have run, wouldn't have jumped. But the investigation stalled. There was no evidence of foul play, or of anything at all. And so, just like that, the case went cold. For years, Emily clung to fragments of that last night. Elise dancing by the bar, laughing over midnight ice cream, leaning on the deck railing and saying, "This feels like a dream I never want to wake up from." But dreams can turn into voids, and the ship sailed on. 2 decades later, Emily was moving into a new apartment. She had just begun to accept the silence when she opened a weathered cardboard box labeled college stuff. Inside was a stack of old books, a few Polaroids, and a postcard, unstamped, addressed in Elise's handwriting, dated 2 days before she vanished, and on the back, scrawled in hurried ink, "If something happens, tell them I didn't fall." It shouldn't have existed. It had never been mailed. It hadn't even been mentioned in the investigation. And it changed everything. Who was Elise afraid of? Why didn't she send the postcard? And why did it resurface, quietly, 20 years later? This is the story of a missing twin, a warning that never made it, and a mystery that refused to stay buried at sea. The sun hung low over the Caribbean horizon as the Ocean Radiance cruise ship left its final port of call and set course for Miami. It was July 18th, 1999, and passengers were in full vacation mode, dancing, dining, laughing. But for Emily and Elise Cartwright, twin sisters from Charleston, South Carolina, it was more than just a vacation. It was a rite of passage. They had always been close, so close, in fact, that as children they created their own language. Where one went, the other followed. Teachers described them as inseparable. Friends joked that they seemed to read each other's minds. And though their personalities differed, Elise was bold and artistic, Emily was more introspective and academic, their bond was undeniable. Their parents had gifted them the cruise as a 21st birthday present. It was Elise's idea to choose the Ocean Radiance, drawn to its art gallery, nightly jazz lounge, and reputation for being elegant, but not stiff. Emily had hesitated. She preferred familiarity over adventure. But in the end, she always followed Elise. The week had been perfect. Warm weather, themed dinners, open decks under stars. But then came that fourth night. According to Emily, the evening began normally. They'd had dinner at the captain's table, taken photos in their matching black cocktail dresses, and made plans to meet friends for karaoke. Elise, however, seemed distracted. She skipped dessert, excused herself early, and said she wanted to take a walk on the upper deck. She kissed my cheek and said, "Don't worry, I just need to clear my head." That was the last time I saw her. Around 1:15 a.m., Emily returned to their cabin. Elise wasn't there. The bed hadn't been slept in. Her shoes were missing, along with the silver shawl she'd worn earlier. Emily wasn't worried at first. She assumed Elise had gone dancing with one of the guys they'd met earlier, but by 3 a.m., worry turned into panic. By 4 a.m., she notified the crew. The ship's security team launched a search. By dawn, an announcement was made over the loudspeakers asking all passengers to check their rooms and report if they'd seen Elise. Her image, taken from her passport photo, was printed and distributed among staff. The ship was 14 hours from its next port. Then a crew member discovered a single heel, silver, scuffed, and damp, near the railing on Deck 12. That was when things changed. Ship protocol demanded a man overboard report. The Coast Guard was alerted, and within hours helicopters scanned the waters along the ship's previous route. But no trace of Elise was found, no signs of a fall, no items in the water. No passengers had seen anything unusual. And strangely, there were no fingerprints on the railing. The ship's CCTV system was limited in 1999. Surveillance tapes were manually overwritten every 24 hours, and no footage existed of Deck 12 past midnight. Investigators recovered only brief glimpses of Elise earlier in the night, walking toward the pool deck, dancing with a group of young travelers, and laughing as she waved her hands in the air. But then, nothing. She vanished. The cruise company cooperated with authorities, but emphasized that Elise's disappearance bore no signs of foul play. The official statement cited a likely accidental fall, possibly alcohol-related. But Emily didn't believe it. Not for a second. She wasn't drunk. She didn't just fall. Something happened, something she was scared of, and no one was listening. In the following days, the Cartwright family was met with overwhelming bureaucracy, interviews, legal disclaimers, cruise liability waivers, and then silence. Elise's case was handed off to maritime authorities, who quietly closed the file months later. There wasn't enough evidence to prove anything. No body, no foul play, just absence. Emily, broken and furious, began digging on her own. She emailed every passenger they had met. She combed online forums. She retraced the ship's itinerary and even flew to the last island port, hoping to find anyone who might have seen something. But there was nothing, and eventually the world moved on. Elise became a name on a laminated flyer, a photograph on a missing persons board, a fading memory on a ship that never stopped sailing. After the ship docked in Miami, Emily and her parents returned home without Elise. The silence in their house was oppressive. Elise's room remained untouched, her art supplies neatly arranged on her desk, a stack of undeveloped film rolls still resting beside her camera. Emily couldn't let go. While her parents retreated into quiet grief, her mother lighting a candle for Elise every morning, her father growing increasingly distant, Emily poured herself into research. She filed Freedom of Information requests, joined early online forums focused on cruise disappearances, and created a basic website titled, "Where is Elise?" But the months passed, then years, and nothing. There were whispers, of course, anonymous tips. A blurry photo someone swore looked like Elise in a Mexican beach town. A cruise bartender from a different ship who claimed to have seen her boarding under a different name. But every lead went cold. Then came the cruelest twist, the speculation. Online commenters, podcasters, and even some journalists suggested Elise had staged her own disappearance, that she'd wanted to escape, that the single shoe was too theatrical. Some even accused Emily of hiding something, twin jealousy, a fight that night, a cover-up. The internet, even in its early days, could be merciless. Emily's life derailed. She dropped out of college a year after Elise disappeared. She couldn't sit in classrooms filled with other girls her age, couldn't laugh at dorm parties or take exams while half of her soul was missing. Instead, she moved home, helped her mother manage Elise's memorial fund, and waited. And every year, on July 18th, she'd walk along the Charleston harbor, drop a white flower into the water, and whisper, "I'm still here. Are you?" In 2004, 5 years after the disappearance, a podcast called Gone at Sea featured Elise's case in its third episode. The host, a former maritime lawyer named Trevor Collins, had a personal interest in cruise ship security failures. He highlighted the lack of cameras, the outdated emergency protocols, and the troubling number of cases just like Elise's. Trevor interviewed Emily. She spoke cautiously, but her voice cracked when describing the last time she saw her twin. "It wasn't like I lost a sister," she said. "It's like I lost a mirror. I keep turning corners hoping to see her reflection." The episode gained moderate attention. A few cruise line workers emailed in. One said they remembered a man in a gray linen suit following Elise in the lounge that night. Another claimed a member of the ship's staff had been quietly transferred after the incident, but couldn't provide proof. Still, nothing substantial came from it. Emily kept searching. In 2009, 10 years after Elise vanished, Emily decided to sell her childhood home. She couldn't stand walking past Elise's old room anymore. She boxed up her belongings, her sister's journals, and the last photo they'd taken together on the ship, smiling with arms around each other beneath a banner that read "Island Nights." And that box, sealed and labeled "College Memories," was never opened again until nearly a decade later. By 2010, the world had changed. The social internet had exploded. Facial recognition software was creeping into mainstream platforms, and online sleuths had begun solving cold cases once thought impossible. But for Emily Cartwright, time had only made her grief heavier. She had tried to move on. A new city, a new job as a freelance designer, and the occasional support group meeting helped distract her, but nothing erased the shadow that Elise's absence had cast. Every time Emily saw identical twins in a coffee shop, on a subway, or in a movie, it sent her spiraling. She still got emails, too, mostly from strangers who found the old "Where is Elise" website or had seen the Gone at Sea podcast. Most offered sympathy, but some were cruel. Others claimed Elise was alive and living under a new name, but they never backed it up. Emily saved every message anyway, just in case. Meanwhile, Elise's case remained officially closed, labeled "Unresolved, Presumed Deceased." The cruise line offered their deepest condolences and quietly moved on. When Emily tried to re-engage investigators in 2013 after reading about new maritime safety laws, she was told there was no new evidence to justify reopening. But then came Reddit. In 2014, someone posted about Elise in a true crime thread titled "Cases That Deserve More Attention." The post included photos, a summary of her disappearance, and commentary on how frequently cruise passengers vanish with no answers. The post gained traction and thousands of comments flooded in. Among them were, "I was on that ship. I remember the twins. There was a guy watching them every night in the piano bar. This reminds me of the Amy Lynn Bradley case. Also went missing on a cruise in the 90s. Patterns? Why was the surveillance footage erased so quickly?" Emily reached out to the original poster, a woman named Lacey who'd gone down a rabbit hole researching cruise disappearances. Lacey had no first-hand info, but had compiled a massive Google Drive folder on Elise's case, including digitized newspaper clippings, archived passenger lists, and an interactive timeline. Together, they started a small online campaign, #JusticeForElise. It gained momentum. A few influencers shared it. Some old crew members reached out. A woman who'd worked at a private security firm claimed there were whispers about a staff member being dismissed quietly. But again, nothing concrete. Rumors, hunches, dead ends. Emily felt the weight of those 10 years like an anchor around her ankles. At every family gathering, there was an unspoken rule: don't bring up Elise. Her parents, once hopeful, had grown resigned. Her mother had stopped lighting candles. Her father rarely left his recliner, but Emily couldn't let it go. That was why, in 2019, when she moved into a new apartment and opened an old box of her things, she immediately felt something shift. Inside that box, buried beneath yearbooks, receipts, and old college papers, was a postcard, unmailed, slightly curled from age. It was written in Elise's handwriting, addressed to Emily. I know this sounds crazy, but if something happens, don't believe the ship's people. I think someone's watching me. I don't know if it's paranoia or something real, but I can't shake the feeling. If you get this and I'm gone, please don't stop asking questions. I didn't fall. Emily sat in stunned silence. She flipped the card. The date on the back? July 16th, 1999. 2 days before Elise vanished. How had it ended up in this box? Elise must have slipped it inside before boarding, or maybe she meant to send it from one of the ports, but never got the chance. The message was rushed, written on hotel stationery from a Miami marina. And now, 10 years later, it had found its way back. This wasn't just a message from a missing girl. It was a warning and a clue. Emily stared at the postcard for hours, running her fingers over the ink, tracing each curve of her sister's handwriting as if it could bring her back. It wasn't just a memory. It was Elise's voice, echoing through time. A plea, a confession, a secret. She scanned the note and sent it to Lacey, her Reddit connection. Lacey responded immediately. This changes everything. They revisited every timeline, every piece of speculation, every theory. The postcard confirmed what Emily had always believed. Elise hadn't simply vanished. She was scared. She was watching someone, or someone was watching her. They created a new file, Postcard Timeline Theory. It mapped out Elise's last known moments and included the letter as a red flag in the sequence. The timing was chilling. The postcard was written on July 16th, during their brief stay in Miami, the day before boarding the cruise. That meant Elise had sensed danger before even setting foot on the ship. But she hadn't told anyone, not even Emily. Why? Was it someone they met in Miami? Had she seen something she wasn't supposed to? Or worse, had someone followed her onto the ship? Emily's obsession deepened. She revisited the passenger manifest from the cruise, now publicly available thanks to a leaked archive. Among the names, one stood out, Vincent Morello. He had no online presence, no criminal record, but a Reddit user claimed the same name had popped up in another missing person case from a European cruise. Digging further, they found reports that Morello had worked private security for a third-party vendor contracted on Ocean Radiance, the same ship where Elise vanished. Though officially listed as a passenger, it was now suspected he may have been operating undercover as an asset for internal loss prevention, a common but secretive practice on luxury liners in the 90s. And then he disappeared too. No address, no public records after 2003. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The more Emily searched, the more the pieces refused to fit cleanly. But one thing was clear. Elise's fear wasn't baseless. Someone had frightened her. Someone was on that ship. Emily took the postcard to a private investigator, a woman named Joanna Salcedo, who specialized in cold cases with digital footprints. Joanna ran handwriting analysis, confirmed the paper's age, and agreed that Elise's letter held new investigative weight. She submitted it to the authorities, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Elise Cartwright's case file was reopened. The news spread quickly online. Hashtags revived. Podcasts resurfaced. Local news stations in Charleston and Miami ran segments on the story. For the first time in 20 years, Emily felt like her voice was being heard. But with attention came old wounds. Strangers speculated again, this time with more venom. Some suggested the postcard was fake. Others blamed Emily for waiting too long. Her inbox flooded with messages, both supportive and hateful. Still, she pressed forward. Joanna tracked down several former Ocean Radiance crew members, now retired or working in different industries. One steward, Mark Avalon, admitted he remembered Elise, said she was quiet but always kind, and that she once asked about changing rooms. That detail had never been in the official record. Why would she want to switch cabins? Another crew member, a bartender, said a man in a linen suit had been following Elise that week, and that she'd looked uncomfortable, even nervous during a midnight piano set on the third night. Emily was stunned. That had been her memory, too. Elise excusing herself from dinner that night, saying she wanted to walk the deck alone. But what if it hadn't been about needing air? What if she'd been trying to get away? Joanna assembled a report compiling all the new witness statements, Elise's postcard, and previously overlooked details. She submitted it to a journalist with the Post and Courier, who published an in-depth feature titled "The Twin Who Never Came Back." The article went viral. And in a quiet suburb outside Tampa, Florida, an elderly mail carrier named Bernard Reyes recognized a name: Elise Cartwright. He called the number listed in the article, and he had something to say. Bernard Reyes had been a mail carrier for nearly 40 years before retiring in 2015. He'd delivered to every kind of home, from trailer parks to gated communities, and in his words, he'd seen more than most ever talk about. When he read the name Elise Cartwright in the newspaper article, something clicked in the back of his mind. He remembered the name from nearly 2 decades earlier, not from a headline or missing persons report, from a letter, a postcard. "It was in a batch of mail we found stuffed into a defunct sorting chute at the old depot," he explained when he called Emily. "Postcards, from all over, lost, misrouted, damaged. Most were blank, but one had handwriting that stuck with me. It wasn't Elise's postcard, not the one Emily had found in her box. It was another, addressed not to Emily, but to someone named Joanne Harwell in Key West, dated the same day, July 16th, 1999. The message read, "Joanne, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm scared. He's on this ship, or he's following me. If I'm not back by the 23rd, tell the truth. E. It was signed only with an E, but Bernard was sure it was the same Elise. The handwriting was identical, he told Emily. "I wish I'd known. I wish I'd reported it." Emily felt her knees weaken. Another letter? To another person? Who was Joanne Harwell? With Joanna Salcedo's help, they found her. Joanne Harwell had been Elise's roommate for 1 semester in art school, someone Emily vaguely remembered. They'd had a falling out, Emily recalled, though she never knew why. Now in her 40s, Joanne was shocked to be contacted. "I haven't spoken about Elise in years," she said during a video call. "We had a strange semester. She was intense, distracted. Then she stopped returning calls. I thought she'd ghosted me." Emily sent her the photo of the postcard Bernard had kept. Joanne stared at it for a long time before saying, "She never told me anything. Not about a man, not about being scared, but she was carrying secrets. I see that now." The message, combined with the one Elise wrote to Emily, painted a new picture. Elise had clearly been frightened before the cruise even began. She suspected she was being followed. She tried to alert someone, maybe more than one person. And now, it seemed, there was more to uncover. Joanna took both postcards to a forensic linguist. The expert analyzed Elise's writing patterns, urgency, tone, and syntax. His conclusion? Elise wasn't panicking. She was preparing. "This wasn't a breakdown," he said. "She wasn't unraveling. She was documenting." In other words, Elise knew something was going to happen. With this new angle, Joanna began tracing possible connections. She searched maritime employment records, looking for any staff member or private contractor who had been assigned to both the Ocean Radiance and other cruises involving disappearances. And that's when she found it. Vincent Morello, the same man they had flagged earlier. But now she had a second ship name, the Ocean Vista, where a woman named Lila Daniels had gone missing in 1997. It was never solved. The case went cold, but Lila had left behind a diary page smuggled in the liner of her suitcase, and the last line read, "He's watching me again." The one with the gray suit and the smile that doesn't reach his eyes. It matched witness descriptions from Elise's case. Joanna ran a full background search. Morello had used several aliases in the late 90s and early 2000s. He worked under shell companies, mostly in freelance security roles on ships. But after 2003, he vanished. No employment, no banking, no address. Until now. Joanna found a property in Belize registered under one of his aliases, V.M. Lang, a cabin on a secluded bluff, purchased in 2004 with cash. And on local message boards, there were whispers of a quiet older American man who never left the property. With Emily's blessing, Joanna contacted a journalist named Aaron Cordova, who worked out of Mexico City and had contacts in Belize. Aaron agreed to investigate. Within weeks, he was standing outside the rusted gates of a sun-bleached house with boarded windows and a long-forgotten mailbox. He posted a short video from the scene, captioned, "Could this be where the truth finally lives?" What he found next would send shockwaves through Emily's world. Inside the abandoned home, police discovered a fireproof lockbox. Inside the box, newspaper clippings from missing persons cases, passenger ID tags, and photos. One of those photos? Elise Cartwright, standing beside a man in a gray suit, on the deck of the Ocean Radiance. Her smile was forced. Her eyes, afraid. The photo was grainy and sun-washed, but unmistakable. Emily knew that expression. Half a smile, the subtle stiffness in her twin's shoulders, the way Elise's eyes would flash with discomfort, even when trying to stay composed. The man beside her, dressed in a pale gray linen suit and wearing dark sunglasses, looked relaxed, almost smug. That image had been buried for over 20 years, locked inside a weathered box thousands of miles from where Elise had disappeared. Authorities in Belize photographed and catalogued everything found in the house. But the most chilling discovery wasn't the photos or the name tags. It was the stack of undelivered letters, dozens of them. Some addressed to government agencies, some to private individuals, some had only first names, all written in the same delicate, hurried handwriting. Elise's handwriting. The letters weren't dated, but the paper had yellowed. Each one hinted at fear, surveillance, threats, a growing sense of isolation. In one note, Elise wrote, "I know what he did to her. I know he'll do it to me if I don't leave. I just don't know where to go." Another read, "Emily, if you ever find this, tell the world it wasn't an accident. I was never safe on that ship, and I was never alone." There was no clear indication that Elise had survived long after the cruise, but these notes proved something long denied. She hadn't died that night. She had lived, if only briefly, after vanishing, and someone had taken her, held her, watched her. Emily's hands trembled as she read through copies sent by Aaron. She couldn't breathe. The impossible had just become possible. Elise hadn't been lost to the sea. She had been stolen. Interpol got involved once Belizean authorities reported the findings. The property was declared a crime scene. Though no body was recovered, DNA swabs confirmed Elise had been in that house. Her hair was found in a comb. A single fingernail, later matched to her via DNA, was lodged between floorboards near a rusted radiator. That was when Aaron uncovered a final terrible truth. A diary, bound in red leather, its cover cracked from humidity. Inside, 34 entries. Some were torn, others trailed off mid-sentence. The last one was dated 2000. "He says I'm lucky, that most girls wouldn't be kept alive this long. But I know I'm not safe. If this ever makes it to Emily, don't let them forget me. I didn't disappear. I was hidden." The room spun. Emily clutched the printed scan of that final page to her chest. Elise had fought to be remembered, to be found, to be heard. And for the first time, Emily truly heard her. The story made global news. Major outlets picked it up. Podcasts devoted entire seasons to Elise's case. Documentarians reached out to Emily. True crime communities flooded social media with theories, timelines, and tribute videos. Hashtags like #Find Elise and Elise's Voice trended across platforms, but no one could find Vincent Morello. Interpol's manhunt turned up sightings in Guatemala, Brazil, and even Spain, but they were all false. He had vanished as easily as Elise once had. Still, the postcard, the letters, and the diary had cracked open a door long sealed. Joanna, Emily, and Lacey created a digital archive of every piece of evidence, accessible to the public. They titled it The Hidden Twin Files. Survivors from other cruises came forward. A few women described being followed on the Ocean Radiance by an older man who matched Morello's description. One woman recalled narrowly escaping a locked corridor where she had felt trapped and seeing a figure disappear down the hallway in a pale suit. The cruise line was hit with lawsuits from multiple families. Though no direct legal link was made to Elise's disappearance, the mounting pressure forced the company to overhaul security policies, publicly apologize, and offer settlements to affected families. But none of that brought Elise back. Still, it brought her closer. In March 2022, Emily visited Belize. She stood outside the abandoned property and placed a single white flower on the rusted gate. Then she walked to the nearby cliff overlooking the ocean. The breeze reminded her of the cruise ship deck. The sound of waves crashing below felt both familiar and cruel. She pulled the red diary from her bag, placed it on the rocks, and sat in silence. "I found you, Lisa," she whispered, "and I'm not done." She stood up, took a deep breath, and turned toward the future. The truth had been buried, but not lost. Elise's voice had survived. Against all odds, against time, against silence, it had survived. And now, so would Emily. Emily's return from Belize didn't mark the end of the journey. In fact, in many ways, it marked the beginning of a different kind of search. Not for a person, but for peace. In the months that followed the global spotlight on Elise's case, Emily became a quiet but powerful advocate for families of the missing. She appeared on podcasts, spoke at conferences on cold cases, and even advised other siblings navigating similar nightmares. She never described herself as an activist. "I'm not trying to fix the system," she once said in an interview. "I'm just trying to make sure no one else feels as alone as I did." Joanna continued working the case independently, filing Freedom of Information Act requests and working with cyber forensic teams to comb through old communications connected to Morello's aliases. Every so often, new leads came up. Nothing definitive, but they still hoped. Lacey helped build a community around Elise's memory. A digital memorial space went live, allowing people to leave messages, read about the timeline, and explore archived documents. Some people wrote notes directly to Elise. Others wrote to Emily. One comment read, "I didn't know her, but I know the ache of losing someone and not getting answers. Elise is more than a headline now. She's real. Thank you for letting us know her." That was the goal, to make sure Elise's story didn't end as just another tabloid mystery, because for so many years that's all she had been. The twin who vanished on a cruise. But Elise was a daughter, a sister, an artist. She loved sketching people on the subway and had a strange obsession with moonlight photography. She was real, she was here, and now, at least, part of her story had been told. Meanwhile, Emily's parents faced the truth with a fragile grace. Her father, who had once sat in silence watching reruns for hours, now kept Elise's photo in a silver frame on his nightstand. "She came back to us," he said softly, when Emily handed him the diary copy. "Not the way we wanted, but she came back." Her mother began knitting again, something she hadn't done since the summer Elise disappeared. Grief doesn't disappear. It changes shape, and now it had morphed into something that could be spoken aloud, no longer hidden behind whispered conversations or long silences at dinner tables. Now they could say her name without the sting of not knowing, because they did know. They knew she had been brave. They knew she had resisted. They knew she hadn't fallen overboard or run away. She had been taken, and she had left breadcrumbs in the form of postcards, letters, and a diary she must have prayed would one day be found. And it had. Years passed, seasons shifted, the world moved on, as it always does. But for Emily, time had become something elastic. Sometimes it felt like Elise had only just disappeared. Other times, it felt like she had been gone for centuries. But every now and then, the grief softened into something quieter, like a shadow that no longer frightened her. The room that had once been Elise's was no longer a museum of memory. Emily had packed the drawings, the old camera, the pressed flowers, and the record collection into a chest. She kept one item on her desk, the postcard Elise never mailed. The one she found in the attic, faded, worn, but now laminated to preserve it forever. That postcard had become a symbol, not just for Emily, but for thousands of strangers across the world. Filmmakers approached her. Authors asked for permission to adapt Elise's story. Emily declined the first few. Then one offer came through that felt different. A documentary company, known for sensitivity and careful storytelling, wanted to collaborate with her directly, not as a subject, but as a co-producer. She said yes. In 2024, the documentary Unsent, the Elise Cartwright story, premiered at a major film festival. It won an audience award. People stood in silent reverence as the final scene played Elise's diary entry, read aloud by Emily in a studio, her voice cracking but steady. "I didn't disappear. I was hidden. Don't let them forget me." They hadn't, and they wouldn't. The documentary reignited public interest. International law enforcement resumed cold case inquiries linked to Morello, and new connections were uncovered. 2 more cruise ship disappearances from the late 90s that had been loosely tied to unidentified suspicious crew members. Though charges were never filed, pressure mounted on cruise operators to overhaul background checks, missing person protocols, and surveillance transparency. Emily testified before a maritime safety committee. She held up a copy of her sister's postcard and said, "This was all we had, for years, and it was enough to change everything." The room fell silent. She left with the kind of closure most families in her position never get. But Emily never saw herself as finished. She launched a nonprofit in Elise's name, the Unsent Project, dedicated to uncovering stories that never got told. She partnered with investigative journalists, digital archivists, and families of missing persons to share stories that had gone cold, not just to solve them, but to honor them. Their tagline was simple: "They didn't vanish. We just stopped looking." Emily traveled less now. She stayed rooted in Charleston, near her parents, occasionally walking the pier Elise loved as a child. Sometimes she'd leave behind a postcard, blank, just a quiet gesture to whoever needed it next. One fall afternoon, years later, she got a message from a young woman in Ohio. "My sister disappeared when I was 8. Everyone thought she ran away. But I found her journal, and it sounds a lot like Elise's story. Can I send you something?" Emily replied, "Yes, always." And she meant it, because behind every unsent postcard, every letter hidden in a wall, every torn page of a diary, is a voice, a life, a truth that deserves to be found. And Emily Cartwright would never stop listening for them. Sometimes a mystery doesn't end with a body or a confession. Sometimes it ends with a whisper, written on the back of a postcard, never mailed, tucked away in an attic for nearly 2 decades. But that whisper can echo louder than a shout if someone is willing to listen. Elise Cartwright vanished in 1999. For years, her disappearance was just another unsolved case, another name on a list. The world moved on, assuming she was gone. But one small object, a piece of her voice preserved in ink, cracked open the silence. It pulled at the thread of a hidden life, and with it, the truth unraveled. We may never know exactly what happened during those missing hours on the cruise. We may never know how long Elise survived, or the full extent of what she endured. But what we do know, what cannot be denied, is that she tried to speak, and eventually her sister heard her. Emily Cartwright didn't stop at grief. She turned her pain into purpose. In doing so, she showed us something powerful, that even after decades, justice, however incomplete, can still arrive. That memory is an act of resistance. That love, in its most determined form, leaves breadcrumbs through time. So, as we close this story, we invite you to ask yourself, what would you have done if you found a forgotten letter from someone you once loved? Would you have opened it? Would you have believed it? Would you have gone looking? These are the questions that keep these stories alive. These are the choices that define whether a mystery is ever truly over, or just waiting to be found again. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Let it be more than content in a feed. Let it be a call to listen, to the quiet, the unsent, the unheard. Because for every Elise there are thousands more, still missing, still waiting, and maybe, just maybe, someone out there is holding the clue that changes everything. Thank you for watching. And if you know a story that needs to be told, leave it in the comments. We're still listening. We always will be.